Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much. You did a great job. All right, everyone. We're here to talk about some tips and tricks for auditing. I got to talk to some of you ahead of time. Interesting to see where everyone's coming from. So hopefully we can get through some of the basics of accessibility and then talk about some auditing. So my name is MichaelaBlackham. I'm a front-end developer at Atten Design Group. I focus on accessibility there as well. Atten is a digital strategy, design, and development agency based out of Denver, Colorado. We use Drupal and other open source technologies, user-centered design, agile development methodologies, and a collaborative approach with our clients. We work with amazing organizations like the WWF, Stanford University, and the Guttmacher Institute, to name a few. Basically, we like to work with cause-driven organizations that are doing work that matters. Today, like I said, we'll be going over some of the basics of accessibility and how we can use that knowledge to perform accessibility audits. I do have a disclaimer though. These are some of the tools that I tend to use and that I recommend. This is something that is extremely helpful to get in the habit of testing your own things before sending them along to impaired users. You want to make sure they're not testing that nitty-gritty stuff that should have been caught from the beginning. This is also helpful before you send it to large companies, for instance, before you have to do the big paycheck. If you're able to get some of those things done ahead of time, it'll actually be better for you. So the goal may not be to perform an audit completely, but maybe to learn some tips and tricks to avoid common mistakes, so audits aren't nearly as overwhelming. But before we begin, I just want to talk a little bit about myself. I started my career in the web industry, originally as an interactive designer. I moved into development full-time about 2 to 3 years ago, and ever since I can remember, interaction, ease of use, and great organization has always been something that was very important to me. I grew up with a cousin my age with Duchenne muscular dystrophy and watched how she was able to do her homework, navigate the internet, or even just listen to music on her iPod, all with little to no mobility and difficulty speaking loud enough for talk-to-type programs like Dragon or Siri. Sometimes she had to get very creative, but most of the time she had to ask for help, which I know frustrated her immensely, and I always wanted to relieve her of that stress. So I slowly got involved with accessibility. But really, focusing on accessibility of your site is important in order to relieve the stress of everyone using your site, not just for people who may struggle with it a bit more like M. So what is the problem? Why are we here today? People are glued to their phones, computers, and tablets, and the wealth of knowledge and information at their fingertips. The internet is the main source of information for pretty much everyone nowadays, and according to the CDC, 53 million adults live with some form of a disability in the USA. That's roughly 22% of the population. So why does that affect you? That's 1 in every 5 adults in the US. That's 1 in every 5 users that may be interacting with your site. And even more surprising is that this doesn't even include the number of internet and smartphone obsessed children and teenagers in the country who may qualify as disabled as well. So what is accessibility? I mean, it seems like everyone kind of either went to sessions and kind of got some of the basics, but is there anyone that doesn't really know much of what's going on, where to start, or everyone kind of did accessibility 101 before the 201? All right. So basically, we want to just understand what it means fully before you can actually perform any kind of an audit. And accessibility, it means in order to is easy to obtain, use, and understand. So what does that actually mean? Well, it can be explained and achieved under the principle of POUR. All websites and products should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. We'll go over these quickly. So when I talk about it being perceivable, I just mean that users must be able to process the information. This means providing text for those who cannot hear and audio for those who cannot see, as an example. This also means that your content must work with screen readers and other assistive technologies. Next, we need to make sure that everyone can operate websites and applications with a variety of tools. Many users with disabilities cannot operate a mouse. Alternatives like keyboard-based or touchscreen operation should always be implemented. This is a good one. If users can perceive and operate a website, it actually doesn't mean that they can understand it. If understandable websites use clear, concise, language and offer functionality that is easy to comprehend. If this feels more like usability than accessibility, that's because usable websites are inherently more accessible. And finally, robust. Your product should work across all platforms, and that's including those fun, outdated IE versions. It doesn't need to have all those fancy animations, but the user should still be able to access the same information without any major issues. So let's talk a little bit about who needs an accessible website. Any guesses to who needs an accessible website? Kind of already said it, but everyone benefits from an accessible website. There may be some demographics we work extra hard to accommodate for, but in reality, creating a more accessible website creates a better user experience for you guys and for myself. But, like many others, I fell into the usual grouping. Everyone tends to start off and think that accessible websites are just for the completely visually impaired, for the blind, but it can be actually broken down into 4 main categories. People with visual impairments, motor or physical impairments, auditory impairments, as well as cognitive impairments. First, we'll talk about visual impairments. And again, when you hear this, a lot of times people just think completely non-sighted. There's actually a lot more to it. So what does it mean when I talk about visual impairments? It could be someone completely non-sighted. It could be someone with low, obstructed, or constricted vision, kind of like a tunnel vision kind of issue going on. It could be someone like my father who's colorblind, or even each of our aging grandparents. Next, we'll talk about motor or physical impairments. This is something that obviously was incredibly dear to me, what got me really into this, and so it's very important, and it feels like it's something that people always tend to forget about. So what does it mean when I talk about motor or physical impairments? It could be someone like my cousin Emily with a disability from birth. It could be the wounded vet that uses prosthetics, or even my niece with her broken arm or finger. And it's funny because I always bring up something temporary that could actually affect you in this. And it's something that can affect us at any time. It could be injured limbs to even our just aging bodies. Next is auditory impairments. This is especially important in the educational world, like universities, museums, libraries, to even YouTube, where there are a lot of videos as a reference for teaching. I just bought a house, and it's a definite fixer-upper, and if it wasn't for YouTube tutorials, my house would still be a mess. And that's just something for me, and I can't imagine people who are actually needing those videos every day. So what does it mean when I talk about auditory impairments? It could be someone who's completely non-hearing, or even my grandfather who wears a hearing aid. And finally, cognitive impairments. What does it mean when I talk about cognitive impairments? It could be someone like my cousin Matthew who has Down syndrome. It could be the little boy I babysit with autism. It could be your friend who may suffer from dyslexia, or me with an extreme motion sickness kind of deal. This isn't something I can normally relate to others, but the extreme motion sickness is very interesting to me because it affects me. I found out it affects other people that I've met recently, and this is something that's becoming actually more and more aware of, because the military has been bringing it up for years, because they have these pilots that can fly these crazy planes, do all these crazy tricks, but you put them in the flight simulator, and then some of them just physically cannot handle it. So just by bringing that up, it's becoming more aware. And like, for instance, for me, if you change the scroll speed, which drives me bananas, and like maybe have some things moving in or some animations, a lot of that will make me have to step away because it makes me physically ill. So that was a quick run through of the basics of accessibility. I don't want to go into too much detail. So now we can jump into accessibility audits and kind of how to approach them, what they are, and then some tips and tricks. So what is an accessibility audit? Basically, you need to make sure that all users with any form of impairments can navigate your website. The experiences can be slightly different, but the overall outcome and content should be accessible to everyone. A good example of that is, don't always recommend it, but a different experience, like carousels are terrible for users who are navigating with keyboards or screen readers. But sometimes you can put an alternative in place that maybe is hidden to visual users, but a screen reader can still see it, that they can just easily go through a list. And it kind of gives that same experience without losing that information. I still don't love carousels, don't use them, but there's alternatives out there. One thing I like to think of is the early days with responsive websites, where I heard all the time, like, oh, it's just on mobile, just like get rid of it, it's not that important. but a lot of people will still want that footer navigation and not have to do 3 or 4 clicks to get to that information that they were looking for, when on the main website it has a very easy way to navigate there. We should be getting the same information whether we're able users, whether we're using a keyboard or a screen reader. So how do I know what to follow? The first thing about an audit is getting the guidelines. So there are really 2 big ones that we tend to use, WCAG 2.1 and 508. Now keep in mind, I say WCAG, but there are a number of ways to pronounce it. I hear something different every day. The normal ones I hear are WCAG, 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 but really just you do you. The end goal is the same. Call it whatever you want. I really don't care all that much. Just make sure you follow the guidelines. And a good thing with 508 is it's kind of, they're both very similar, and actually 508 finally caught up with WCAG 2.0, so they're actually pretty similar. So it's kind of like WCAG is just a subdivision of 2.1. So first, we'll talk about WCAG 2.1. This is the main set of guidelines that most people follow. It stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There are 3 levels. There's A, AA, and AAA. A is kind of bare minimum. We should all be doing it. You're not doing a great job as a developer or a designer or content editor if we really have to be focusing on those level 1, level A issues. AAA is a little on the opposite spectrum. It doesn't really affect a lot of all sites out there, and a lot of times if you're going in AAA, it's actually not the best for visual users, so it's kind of on the opposite spectrum. So I'm sure a lot of you know that AA is kind of the main one that we all tend to go for. WCAG 2.0 was just updated to 2.1 in June. These guidelines are backwards compatible, so everything that was in 2.0 is completely the same in 2.1. They've just added some guidelines or added to some other guidelines that were already in there, and they're mostly focusing on mobile devices and users with cognitive disabilities. Next is 508. Basically, how do you know if you need to be 508 or WCAG? A good rule of thumb is if you haven't heard of 508, you haven't been told you have to follow it, then you probably don't have to follow it. But the good thing is that if you follow WCAG by mistake, you're actually probably going to get some extra steps in there anyway. But one thing I want you all to remember is that creating an accessible site is more than just following a checklist. I always ask clients when we're doing an audit, do you want to pass and be the minimum it needs to so that you don't get in trouble, or do you want your users to have a good experience and return to your site over and over again? 508 and WCAG are amazing checklists to follow and are amazing guidelines to give access to your site, but we want to make sure your users also have a great experience while they are there. So, for example, just because you have alternative text, you're going to get that check mark when you do your automated testing, but really your alternative text could say image 1, which means absolutely nothing, which I see all the time. Another one is you can see a lot like, oh, you have your label with your input. Cool, looks good, but it's not always the best scenario. I have a good example of that. So if you guys want to do me a favor and like make a little circle with your hand, kind of look through it like you're looking through a telescope. I mean, you guys are all pretty far away, so you might not have the issue, but if you were looking at this on a site, you actually have to move your head kind of back and forth to align the label with the input. Which is, you can imagine going through an entire list and having that really close, so you really have to look back and forth. And it can be confusing. And this is similar to someone having tunnel vision. Obviously not exactly, but it's the best I can do at the moment. Something like this is a little bit better, but it's like visually it's not as appealing because the line's in the middle and nothing's really lining up. But it does make it easier to scan. But something like this is completely ideal. This is what we're really looking for because you have the normal readability piece to it. You're going left to right, up and down. You don't really have to scan back and forth. This is something an automated test would never get. So it's just one of those things that the checklists are great, but you want to make sure you give a great user experience as well. So when is an audit necessary? Usually there's 3 different times that you should be auditing your site. Usually when it's client-facing, internal-facing, or just on the personal side of things. So client facing, this usually comes up after a site has launched and a client comes to you and asks you to perform an audit on their site, or you're going to someone else to have an audit on your site. This is usually after someone has told them that they can't access your site or heard from other companies that they just need to do it. These are usually older sites, or I hope that they are, because, well, sites nowadays should always go through an internal audit. There should be checkpoints along a sprint or project to check for ADA compliance. This way you can catch some of the larger issues before they get way out of hand. This is a great way for PMs to make sure designers, content writers, and developers get involved. But really, again, we should take it upon ourselves and make sure we are doing personal audits. Every developer needs to test their code. They need code reviews. What makes testing for accessibility any different? If you're putting that along your system there, along your sprints, you should be catching those big ones. This is the same with proofreading your content or even design crits. You want to make sure you're just catching those issues before they get bad. Really large and out of hand. So now we're going to start diving into what an audit entails. It entails some guidelines to follow, like 508 or WCAG. I like to find out if we are just going to pass or if we want to create some good experience there as well. We need to include the testing, which is both automated and definitely manual. And then we also want to find out if we're doing desktop, if their mobile is extremely different than their desktop, do we have to include that as well? For this presentation, I mentioned before, we're just going to be focusing on the desktop portion just because mobile can be an entirely new ball game. But most of the items that we discuss here will actually transfer to mobile, so we'll actually catch most of the items. It's just if your mobile is more like an app or something that it becomes very different. But to touch on it very briefly, sites must be responsive. They should work both horizontally and vertically. Be careful of touch sensitivity. Like my cousin Emily, she could barely move, so she needed that very, very light touch to be able to say where she was going. So you have to be able to change that, and you have to be able to make sure you're not forcing it upon anyone. You have to be careful of target size for people who necessarily can't get to that small little point, and things of that sort. So testing and tools. There are so many tools out there. I'm sure you guys have seen in all of the other presentations that were happened this past week. They're all pretty similar. Some are free, some are not free. I personally go with a lot of the free options because some of the expensive options are companies like SiteImprove. They are wonderful. They do a great job. We're partnered with them, so we work with them a lot. But it isn't always worth it. We work with a lot of nonprofits and a lot of smaller companies, and if they have 100 pages, it's not worth paying that amount of money to end up going to them for something like that. So being able to start your own testing and then maybe partner with other companies, you'll be able to get everything that you really need. And that's just for automated testing too with SiteImprove. The manual side of testing is usually an additional cost, so getting aware on your end can save some money and some on your client's end. So there are two parts to testing. You need to test it with your automated tools and manual. Automated testing, I'm sure you guys might know, but when I say automated, you don't necessarily click a button and you get all of your answers. You still need to understand how to interpret the information and how to provide solutions. It isn't a catch-all, and manual testing is always still necessary. I'm gonna keep putting it out there. But it's a great way to catch some of the nitty-gritty tasks without combing through your code for items like ARIA, landmarks, hierarchy, alt text, misspellings, and so on. So there are plenty of automated tools out there. I'm going to just display two. It's a great place to start, and they actually do a really wonderful job. They've been around for a while. So one of the big ones is Wave and Lighthouse. But there are other ones like Axe, there's Pally. You can also get integrations with Selenium and Axe. You can import some with your CI tools if you're on the developer side or anything of that sort. But overall, these are two great options to start with. So Wave is a great option because it's extremely well known. There is a website or a Chrome extension. I prefer the Chrome extension just because we have a lot of private sides, and the website doesn't allow you to get that private side. However, I found a quirk with Wave and all other automated tools. Color contrast. No automated tool has been able to figure out color contrast to be 100%. I'll show you something like later on. I think I found an example of it, but there's a lot of false errors because if, let's say, you have an image behind text or you have canvas behind text, it's not going to render that color of what's going on there. It will only render a background color to what is actually there. So if you have an image and your background color is still white and you have white text on top of it, it's going to say it's wrong. But really, it could still work. So there are other tools out there that I'll show you that you can kind of test that contrast. Next is Lighthouse. This is integrated with Chrome. If you don't have the latest version, you can download the extension. And overall, it's just really clean, it's easy to work with, and it's finalized in a well-designed report, and it's so nice to just hand it off to the clients and all that jazz. It does SEO, performance, and best practices as well. Like I said, it creates a report that you can send to clients. And the only thing is you have to open up this report in their Lighthouse viewer, which I'll have a link for you as well, but overall it's amazing. The clients love it. There's colors, there's circle graphs, there's percentages, and even better, it gives you your site a score. Clients love looking at the score because then they at least see like, oh no, I'm at a 47%, but at least we can incorporate this into the sprint to maybe get to 60% the next time, and then you can kind of work up to what's going on. There's also been talk of Google possibly weighing search results based on the scores here. So, something to think about. In manual testing, again, this is the most important one. To truly determine how accessible and functional a website is, a great deal of manual code review and functional testing is involved. Different kinds of assistive technology must be used. Human judgment is often applied, and this might be the only way to know, for example, that little straw example that I showed you. You wouldn't know that that was a terrible user experience unless a human actually looked at it and kind of saw what was going on. Or the quirk with color contrast. You would say, oh no, this is wrong, but really, it is correct. The automated tool just didn't catch that. So manual testing. Why do we do manual testing if there is automated testing options? Like I said, there's a catch. A lot of these items can only go so far with automation and checking the dev side of things. But a lot of the guidelines follow experiences in logical order and such that only a human can fully understand. Even the automated tools in their reports tell you which items you need to check manually. That's why we need to focus on using keyboard and a screen reader if you really want to dive in. Keyboard testing. This is the easiest thing to check off your list on the manual side. It's literally going into your site and using the tab, space, arrow keys, escape key, and enter keys to navigate your site. I like to think of it as it either passes or it fails. You can either navigate the whole site or you can't. Because if you failed on one page, a lot of assistive technologies actually use keyboard input and keyboard commands. For instance, if someone's using Dragon or Siri, using a joystick, the head taps, the tongue clickers, they're all based on keyboard commands. So if you fail keyboard, you're failing all of those as well. Actionable items. Actually test everything on the site. Try navigating the entire site with just your keyboard. Click physically on everything. Views, links, buttons, forms, carousel, modals. Get out of those modals. Do everything. Try and go to as many pages as possible. Go frontwards, backwards. Kind of just do everything you possibly can. And remember that not everything in the WCAG guidelines is functional. Some of these things are paying attention to focus elements, for example. How is someone using a keyboard to navigate the site? And what if there's no focus element on anything? Like, they will not know where they are on the site. So every actionable item should have a focus state, so users know where they currently are on the page. Finally, logical order. A good visual option for you is actually using Chrome Lens to trace the order you are tabbing through. I'll show you an example of that after. But all that it does is you're going to tab through your site like you normally would keyboard testing, but it actually creates a path to let you know where you went on the page. Like, for instance, I did an audit and I went from the top of the page to the bottom of the page back to the top, which was super confusing, but it was just a modal window that was not hidden correctly for keyboard. Next are screen readers. Has anyone actually used a screen reader before? Okay, 2, awesome. Has anyone heard a screen reader before? Okay, so everyone, pretty much. There are 3 popular types, and really they're the only 3 that you really should be using. The other ones are so minuscule that people are using them like Chromebox, so try and stick with these ones. One of them is Jaws. This is the most widely used screen reader. However, it's only for PC and it's extremely expensive. They're actually finding a big push off of Jaws. I mean, there's still a large chunk that are using it, but a lot of people are moving off of that just because it's so expensive. And there is a free open source option like NVDA, which is another great one. However, again, it's for PC only. I have a Mac, and we don't have any PCs in the shop, so I use Voiceover. It's free, it's on the Mac, and it's also incorporated into your phones if you have an iPhone. So it's very easy to test for both desktop and mobile devices. Just remember that all 3 are great options, and they really try to get to the same point. There's going to be like varying slight things going on, like maybe one reads a label and a title, one just reads the label, one just reads the title, but overall you'll kind of get the same point overall. If you aren't familiar with screen readers, or it makes you nervous, just remember that practice makes perfect, or reach out to organizations like the Blind Institute of Technology. We've worked with them a couple times, and they run audits for you. They'll focus on getting a better experience, and if you want to actually listen to what's going on, they'll let you sit there and kind of follow along and kind of give you little tidbits as you go. Screen reader testing. This is the most tedious of them all, and for people who aren't used to using them, it can definitely become a bit annoying. But it's extremely necessary to do. It's best for someone who uses this as an extension up to themselves to navigate, because they will be a completely different experience than if one of us were to use it. But getting comfortable with some commands or just listening to screen reader crawl through your site can help you anticipate ways to avoid common mistakes or even just create better content. Let's see. Again, just like keyboard, we want to make sure we go through the entire experience. You're navigating the site through sound only. Is it super difficult? Is it confusing? Do you know what you are looking at? Again, click on all actionable items, similar to the keyboard experience. These items can differentiate between keyboards and screen readers, so you just have to make sure it creates the same experience. You want to make sure you navigate through the drop-down and mega menus and explore your site. Are you stuck in the menu? I see that all the time. Or I end up in a drop-down in the menu when I didn't mean to get there. Is there even a notice that your item can be expanded? Next, you want to make sure you pay attention to headings and content. You can start to see that sections can become confusing without correct headings or groupings, or that link text makes no sense to you. This goes for images too with alt text. One thing is that screen readers have the ability to actually navigate a site by either headings or landmarks, or be able to just listen to all links on the page or anything like that. That's why it's important to have correct alt text, or that your links don't say learn more, because they could hear just learn more 10 times and really it's just not relevant to what's going on. And follow your goal. Come to testing scenarios with actual user stories or goals in mind. A great example of this is like a library, for example. Their biggest goal is probably they want someone to check out a book. So they would come to the testing scenario saying, like, how difficult is it to check out a book on the site? Can we make it easier? Can you even do it at all? So now we have some tips and tricks. Finally, we're up to some interesting pieces here. These are tips that I've learned in the process of doing audits at Atten. Some of these will actually be on the testing side, and some are great solutions to some of the issues that we've come up with. So this one is related mostly to project managers first. We want to make sure you get access to Google Analytics if you're doing this yourself. It's not always feasible to test an entire site with like 100 or more pages without going through a ton of time or resources to go through it all. Like I said, there are companies that will go site by site for the automated side, but sometimes it's, like I said, it's super expensive. And in reality, you should be educating yourselves enough, or educating yourselves to set yourself up for success. And half the time, it's actually not worth going site page by page anyways. The same mistakes tend to pop up over and over again. So especially if you're starting it from the very beginning, you should be catching these mistakes before you have to worry about hundreds of pages to go through.
So is the Google Analytics going to tell you about problems, or just which pages you should
Just the pages to really take a look at. Or if you see, like on Drupal, like one of the latest ones that I did was we noticed that the main issues were happening on like the same content type, and it was the top 10 issues that were going on. It was the same content type. So we realized, oh shoot, there's something wrong with the content type. This is what we actually need to go fix. So it kind of helps you in that direction, because once you fix one, you're probably going to fix all the main issues. You also want to make sure you include who needs to make the edits at the end. I find a large chunk of the edits after an audit actually go to content editors and designers. Very rarely does it actually go to development, because we do have those checks. But there's ways we can improve that anyway. Next, content editors. We want to make sure you do not write words in all caps. Definitely not. If you do that, it's going to be read letter by letter. So this, for instance, DONOTWRITE, and it's very annoying if you have a full headline that is written in all caps. If you want it to be styled differently, obviously talk to your developer. They'll put something in CSS. You can end up adding it there, or they can add it to your styles in your CK editor for a drop down for a quick change. You can, however, use all caps if it needs to be in all caps. Like, can't think of any. USA, yes. Like, I couldn't think of any examples. You want to make sure you check hierarchy with no styles option in Wave. I do say this, however, take it with a grain of salt, because it can be a little overwhelming. If you have a ginormous mega menu and you take all the styles away, you're going to see a lot of links at the very beginning. However, it is a great place to start if you're a content editor, because you can see, like, oh shoot, I jumped from an H1 to an H4. Like, that doesn't make sense. Where are all the headings in there? Or I'm trying to think of any other. Maybe you're not using any headings at all. Maybe you're just bolding some paragraph text, which I see so often, which drives me crazy, even for some of the big names. Another good option is the outline extension in Chrome. It's not foolproof or anything, but it's a great way to at least notice. I've used it a lot with clients to be like, your entire page is written in paragraphs, and so you can't see any headings here. It's just a little quick one that you can click, and then you kind of show what's going on. It's very easy to get them to change their mind real fast. Another option is learn to use a screen reader. If you can learn the basics, your alt text will actually get drastically better, because you're going to put yourself in their shoes and you're going to hear what they're hearing. You can better navigate to what you're listening to. For a great example, we had a client that I was doing an audit for, and they were using emojis in their alt text, and I didn't realize it until I heard who star should be in charge of your birth control decision making. You happy woman with medium skin tone raising one hand, not these other guys. And I was just going through, I was like, what did I just listen to? That's very specific. But yeah, so don't use emojis, please. And then the final one is read your site to someone like you're reading it to them over the phone. You'll kind of go through and be like, I guess that image isn't that important. It's like just for design, so I'll just ignore that one. Or, oh man, like this is an important heading, but for some reason it's not written as a heading, and so on. So it'll kind of help you realize what your little tidbits of what you need and what you don't need. Next, the big one, developers. So some tips and some tricks, as I mentioned. The color, this is a different one. The color contrast checker in Chrome is pretty cool. I'm not sure if anyone has seen this. I'll show you after, but in Chrome, when you have text color, you have like the little box that will show you what the color is. If you click on that, you can actually see if you're failing the contrast on AA or AAA. If you open it up and you click on it, it will have a little line that you can actually move it up and down until you approve. So it's an easy way to change something. We find that sometimes the color may have approved in like Sketch or something, but then once you put it into real life, it just like needed a little bit more, so we had to move it down and be like, okay, this still works. So that's a great one. I'll show you that one after. Is your site responsive? If it's not responsive, you're probably going to fail about a third of the accessibility guidelines right off the bat, especially with WCAG 2.1 updates. I mentioned the color contrast errors from before. Always double check. It's all false errors, or even just always double check your contrast, because it could even be a false positive as well. So you want to just make sure that you're checking those. Like I mentioned, it's related to if there's a canvas or image behind your text. It will not render that color. And again, manual testing is very important. Text over images, I had mentioned this before. Make sure you have a background behind every photo that might be a text overlay, just in case that image doesn't load or anything of that sort. You'll also just avoid those false negatives as well. And zoom, zoom, zoom. You don't have to use a proprietary tool, zoom tool for Mac or anything. Just zoom in your site a bunch. If you can still read everything without having to scroll horizontally, you should be good. However, this does not apply to things like tables, which are always a whole other thing, as everyone knows, when it comes to responsive design. So let's talk about keyboards with developers. You want to make sure you actually test the skip to main content link. So many times I've seen it, and you can click on tab, and you're like, oh, okay, it appears, and you kind of tab through and you don't pay attention to it. When you actually click it, it might jump you to that part of the page, but it doesn't mean that they have the tab index, so you could press tab again, and you're just at the logo now, and you're still at the top of the page. You need to be able to change the tabbing focus in order for it to actually work correctly. The default focus styling. As I mentioned, focus styling is very important for every actionable item. However, sometimes the browser's default styling is the best choice. First off, it will not be an error ever. Even if it has that weird contrast, it will always still pass. But mostly just because users can just change what that focus styling is. So if it doesn't work for that site, they can actually change it. So it's best to not even change your focus styling if possible. Interact with all actionable items. And like I said, always make sure you can interact with them. You need to make sure you can access the YouTube videos, you can share that piece of content, you can open the modal window, you can close the modal window. Like I said, test with the Chrome Lens extension. I'll show you that one right after this. Making sure I have, okay, almost done. And just make sure you test forward and backward, because you never know what's going to go on. You want to make sure the tab works, the shift tab, and you can kind of navigate everywhere. And screen reader. Make sure you set your screen reader preferences. If you're using VoiceOver, you can change speed, accent, pitch, to even what's considered your VoiceOver keys. If you don't know, VoiceOver keys are the keys that you use before you can use anything on the keyboard, because if you're just typing, it will just type, so you need to do VoiceOver before you can change anything. And I've heard someone who's used a screen reader, and I'm sure if you guys said you've heard one before, their pitch was very different and their speed was so fast. I could not follow it. And we're speed reading and they're speed listening. It's just the same thing. So you want to make sure you put it down to whatever works best for you. VoiceOver tutorials, they are on your Mac. They're there already. Once you go to the VoiceOver section, you can do all the tutorials, so do them. Turn your screen off and turn your mouse over. You don't want any temptations to cheat. I don't necessarily recommend this right away, just because it can be super difficult to figure out what's going on and know where you are, and then you don't know all the keys yet, so it's not the best way to do it, but it's once you start getting comfortable, it's definitely something to take advantage of this, just so you can kind of be more in the moment there. Test a site you are not familiar with. Make sure you have some fresh eyes. It's good to test your own site, but unfortunately we already have an image of what that site is supposed to look like in our heads, so we can kind of figure out oh, I know where we are, I know we'll be here next, when in reality that you just know what you're expecting, so it's a little bit easier for you to navigate. And the play all option is pretty wonderful. It's an easy, lazy way to listen to the entire page. It's easy to use on your phone as well. So I use this a lot when I'm testing or trying to read a blog while I'm folding laundry, for instance. Or you can make writing down notes very easily, because if you're writing down notes on the same computer that you're using a screen reader with, it's a lot to handle, because you're listening to it and then it's listening to everything that you're typing, and then it's just kind of a lot going on. So if you do the play all, you can write down your notes and you're totally good there. It's also great if your brain or eyes just need a break from the screen. I was saying earlier, I tend to get a little nauseous if things are moving too much or anything's going like that, so a lot of times I'll just turn the screen off and get comfortable and kind of do the play all, so I can kind of hear what's going on. There's also dates. Dates are not read the same way that you would expect them to be read, so do not be scared when you hear instead of October 27th, 2018, you're going to hear October 27-2018. I've had a client be like, oh no, that needs to be fixed. I'm like, no, that's just how it works. 1 to 3 letter words are sometimes read letter by letter. I don't know why sometimes 3-letter words aren't. I'm assuming maybe the does because it's used a lot, and maybe some other ones that it doesn't recognize right away will do letter by letter. Vague link text. We've talked about this beforehand. We hear about it all the time. Don't use learn more, learn more, learn more. However, sometimes some designers, I've been in that case before I really got into accessibility, I understand, but you can kind of you can get around that. So either you can use an ARIA label on that link so that it will actually just read what that link say. So it would be written in HTML like learn more, but the ARIA label for that link would be screen reader testing or something of that sort, so it will actually read what that's supposed to be. Or you can do a hidden span, a visually hidden span within the link so that visually we don't see it, but the screen reader is still reading.
I'll mention that some sighted people, myself included, have trouble with vague link text, and by putting it in the label, that doesn't help me any.
Yeah, I know. That's why.
And I have to read the link like 3 times just to make sure I'm clicking the right link.
Yeah, I'm sure. Sometimes, and like I don't know if I said it, but it's not the ideal solution, but sometimes designers, I mean, we've all kind of been there, so it's tough. Are you using your... Oh.
Yeah,
Try your triple
a
tab on your...
yeah, we have a lot of trouble with staff doing click here links. And,
oh, yeah.
Or www.whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Links.
Like, they're going to read that whole thing, which is definitely not great for anyone. You can probably triple tap your home button, and it usually turns off. That's what mine's set up to be. Make sure you get comfortable. Keep practicing if you forget some commands and do your tutorial over and over again, or just look online. As long as you're taking that first step, the more you do it, the more natural it'll feel. But also physically get comfortable. On projects where I'm doing audits, I always leave screen reader testing till the very end. I try to block off as much time in the day as possible, and I get comfortable. I sit down on my couch. I don't wear headphones because it can get a little obnoxious listening to that all day. So if you're wearing the headphones all day, it could be a little obnoxious, it could be a little annoying or anything of that sort. And finally, remember that screen readers, sometimes it's their fault. It's just sometimes, I mean, they're bloated, they're big, they do some weird things. It's technology, it can be kind of buggy. Maybe you didn't turn your computer off for like 3 weeks. I don't know, sometimes it can get kind of weird. If you're seeing something that just doesn't seem right and you swear it's done correctly, just turn your computer off, restart, it will probably be fine. Let's see, what time is it? Okay, it's like 4 minutes. Do people want to see some basic demos?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so let me change this so it'll be a little bit easier. Okay, this is a little small, but a lot better. So one of the things I wanted to show you, also, sorry, this is an audit that we have done, so don't pay attention to the content. I'm sorry if that's something that offends you, but it's a great option. This is the one with the emojis in the alt text, so it just makes me laugh constantly. But so if we were to look, is this also large enough? Do you need me? We're only going to be looking at this, so this is fine? Okay. No. I haven't used like my trackpad in forever. Come on. So for instance, I wanted to look at the color, the Chrome color checker. So as I mentioned, if you click on the color, for it only works for text and background, but you'll see that there's a contrast ratio right here. And you can already see you're failing the basic minimum. So just by clicking on that, you can see that line. So we're above that line. You see once we kind of get to here, you can see that we're working on the contrast ratio. If I scroll down, oh, I already had it open. Scroll down here, you can see that there's the AA and the AAA, so you can kind of change it to whatever you need to. So that's a fun little tidbit that you can work with. I mentioned, everything is so small. The Chrome outliner, that is so small. I don't know if that's even possible to get bigger. It's not, but if you were really close up here, you would see that these are all the different headings of what's going on here. So I worked with a very large company, and they didn't, like I said, they didn't use any headings. So when you open that up, it was just completely blank. And that's like, oh no, it looks like there's headings, but there really isn't. I wrote down a list of various things to use. All right, Chrome Lens. That one's a fun one. So let's go back to inspect. So it's an extension, like I said, it's called Chrome Lens. It's all the way over here now. And we can start the trace path. It's probably going to get a little weird right now because the zoom is all funky, but so we start the trace. Let's move this all the way here. Like I said, it's not going to be accurate, but you can see you're kind of jumping around. Oh no, I'm not clicking on the right thing. So you can see exactly where we're going. You're like, where are we? Why are we jumping to this spot? And that's because there's an actual drop down that you just don't really notice. But this is great. You can kind of go through, you're kind of jumping all over the place. And the best part about it, I've lost my mouse, okay. At the end, you can actually download an entire PNG for that page. So like for a client, you can be like, all right, this is the issue of what's going on. Or even if it's a content editor doing it to show to a developer, it just kind of gives that visual aspect that's very, very helpful. I mentioned, let's refresh this page, the Wave tool. Like I said, there's wave.webaim. It's still so small. However, like I said, I use the Chrome extension here. And you can see just looking at this, we have like 5 errors, so it's a nice, easy way to kind of jump in there. Like I said, you can implement, I think it's with Wave, maybe it's with Axe with like Selenium, or I know Axe is integrated with some CI tools to kind of do this for you. But sometimes if you're not a developer, this is kind of a good approach to where you start. I'm trying to find, I know this one has a false negative. I think it's this, there's a false negative somewhere with contrast. Let's see. Oh, all of them, probably. Because this background image was a canvas, I believe, so like none of it was actually registering correctly. Or this instance, I think it was like an image repeated for some reason. I don't know. It wasn't our site, I promise. It was just one that we inherited after. But none of this was working because it's just not registering this as an image in the canvas. So it's just one of those things like, oh no, this doesn't work, but really it does. Lighthouse is a great one, as I mentioned. Has anyone actually used Lighthouse before? Yeah, you're doing it all. So this one is, like I said, within Chrome, so you can go, it's called Audits. I don't know if you could see that. You can change the different ones that's going on here. So there's performance, progressive web app, best practices, and so on. I have accessibility. You can run the audit. It'll take just a moment. Sorry, I know I'm like a minute over, but I can at least show you this. So this is what's going on. So you can have the score, and it tells you the various things that actually need to be changed. This one is really just alt attributes, and you can kind of get a full list of everything. And you can download it. So we're going to download just here. We'll save that. And then there's a Lighthouse viewer, which if I come back to my Finder, you can open up this viewer, and this is what you can send to a client. So just send them a link, and you can send them this, and it actually is very helpful to be like, all right, these are the things that are issues. Like I said, I tend to use both Wave and Lighthouse because they're kind of differentiate slightly, but overall they both do a great job. And the last little bit was really a screen reader. I know we have like a moment left, but if you want to listen to that emoji part, that part just gets me every time. So let's see. I do have this. Oh, right. The audio doesn't work really great, so just put your listening ears on.
Accessibility options.
We'll find out.
Use the tab key to navigate and press Voiceover to toggle on application. Accessibility options. Chrome. Expand button. You are currently on a button.
I don't know the best
To
way
press
to go
this
about this
button,
right now.
double tap anywhere on the touch bar.
The voice or the audio isn't working with this, which is kind of a bummer. But I can show it to you after when I don't have to worry about, I can like plug everything, unplug everything. But yeah, that's...
Find keynote accessibility-audit.key application.
Really obnoxious. But what I wanted to show, actually, you know what? I'll show you one last thing.
Accessibility options.
So,
Welcome
as
to
I
Key
mentioned,
Chrome. Keep
we
Earth Control
are in
OK
here.
free.
You can kind of see
Google
what's
Chrome
happening,
window.
what's
Keep
going
Earth Control
on, what
Go
it's saying,
navigation
so
to
we can see
item
we're in the
visited link
navigation,
list
what's
5
going
items.
on. We're on the
Visited
list of
link
5 items.
ACT
Now
2
we're
of 5.
Here, and then it actually,
Heading up.
you can see we're on an icon because that can actually be searchable with a screen reader. So if you have an icon, you either need to hide it for a screen reader, or you need to give it some kind of notice, like make sure it's being read, that it's like this would be expandable item, for instance.
Heading level
and then
3.
it goes
Take
into
control.
A menu
You are
that
currently
hasn't
on a
even
heading level
appeared, but
3.
it's in there.
Visited link.
One thing
Speak
I
out
also
now.
want to show
Links
is the way
menu.
that you can actually
You are
navigate
currently in the
screen reader,
Voiceover
for
menu.
instance, by
This
all
is a
the
list of
links on the
Voiceover
page.
menu options.
See, can I
No
make
items
this
in
larger?
links menu.
Maybe. Nope, I screwed it up.
T. Selected. Visited.
Let's
Keep Earth Control
go
OK free.
here.
Web content.
No, I've never pressed that button before. Okay.
Application.
I'm just gonna get out and go back in.
Welcome to Mac Chrome.
So if we're
Keep
over
Earth
here, and
links
we open this
menu.
up, you can see that
You are
this lists
currently
the
in the
links, and this is
voiceover
why it's
menu.
important not
This
to
is a
have
list of
the word
voiceover
more,
menu
click here, or
options.
anything of that sort,
To
because
navigate
this
up and
is how
down the
most
list,
users
use the
will
arrow
actually
keys.
navigate the site,
To
not
choose
through
a menu
clicking
item,
through.
press
They'll actually go
return.
through there and
Headings
go through
menu.
Headings, for instance, and you can see there is no heading 1, and it jumps immediately from nothing to 3 to a 2 to 3 to 2 to 3, and it's just super confusing.
No items in red spots
and then they
menu.
can also, for instance, in Voiceover, they can kind of favorite some spots. I think the web spots
Landmarks
actually,
menu.
Oh no, landmarks. They only have one landmark on here, so they can only go to the navigation. And this instance on this page was also the skip to main content didn't work. And then if we were to go to spread the word,
Keep Earth Control Copay free
this
web
is
content.
where that
You
fun
are
little
current
bit-
window. No items in landmarks menu.
I'm trying to move things out of the way for you.
No items. No items in headings menu.
Over and over again.
Application.
I'm not very good with screen reader with the touch screen. Has anyone used that? Because once I got
Use
that,
the tab
it's
key to
pretty annoying
navigate
be able to
and
touch
press
screen.
space to toggle Chrome navigate.
So if we go all the way down,
This list to and
which takes
this
a moment
and
'cause I
this
don't have
end
to
of
switch
heading
content
shared
link.
96%
So-
8290. Who should
Here,
be
you
in
can
charge
see,
of
it
your
shows the
birth
emoji,
control decision
but
making?
it's actually reading out
happy
not the
woman with
emoji.
medium
And for
skin
instance,
tone
this
raising
one
one
has
hand,
titles
not these
and
other
alt
guys.
text, so like some
Take
of
action
the
at
alt text doesn't make sense. It's like answering the
http://keepbcfree.com
title that they're using,
image.
and it's all
You
just
are
really
currently on
bizarre.
an image inside of web application.
But yeah, let me go back over here just to say that pour your heart into it, guys. And thanks for coming. Sorry I went a couple minutes over. I'm open to answer any questions. I'll stop the recording. We can kind of chat afterwards. I have my card up here if you guys want anything, and then I have the slides already on there, but they're from an older presentation, so this one was less basic and more in the audit side, so I'll update those and some resources right after this.